Zimbabwe's story is intertwined with the rest of the world. So on the Diplomat Couch, we sit down with ambassadors, head of UN missions, and envoys to bring you the story of those who are driving coordination in Zimbabwe. On today's episode, we are joined by the IOM Chief Envoy, Ms. Diana Cartier. Welcome to the Diplomat Couch.
Thank you very much, Osli.
Ms. Cartier, what are the current migration trends in Zimbabwe and how are they impacting Zimbabwe's development?
Thank you very much, and thanks for this opportunity to speak with you today. When we look at migration in Zimbabwe, we have to remember that, first of all, it's a global trend. It's always existed, and Zimbabwe is definitely not an exception to that. Historically, we've seen migration come in and out of the country. At the moment, and based on figures that come from about 2024, there were about 430,000 migrants in Zimbabwe. That's roughly about 2.6% of the population, primarily coming from countries in the region such as Malawi, Mozambique, the DRC, and Zambia. But in addition to that, when we look at migration, we know that there's anywhere between 1 to 3 million Zimbabweans that live outside the country. And most are, again, in the region, primarily in South Africa and Botswana, but also as far as the UK, Australia, and really you find Zimbabweans around the world. And in addition to that, we have to look at internal migration. There's a significant amount of movement that happens in the country where people are moving from urban areas to rural areas or rural areas to urban areas. They're moving also because of disasters and are being forced to leave as a result of economic opportunity or lack thereof in the areas where they currently are living. So when we look at migration, it's an incredibly vast area. In terms of its impact, it's twofold. There is incredible benefit from migration, and hopefully I can convince you of that throughout this interview. One, a simple fact is in terms of remittances. In 2023, there was $1.8 billion of remittances, formal remittances that came in through formal channels into the country, which is roughly about 9 to 10% of the GDP of that year. Now, in addition to that, diaspora, migrants around the world, Zimbabwean migrants around the world, they are cultural ambassadors, they're learning skills, they're bringing back skills, they're providing job opportunities by investing in trainings here, in companies here, and providing, of course, support to their families. On the other side are the challenges. And yes, we do face brain drain, and the fact that you have skilled people that end up having to leave and look for opportunities elsewhere. And of course, there's also the pressure of internal migration and the services that could be impacted as a result of this migration. But first and foremost, it's important to note that migration in itself is not good or bad. It exists. It has always existed. And for us to really be able to harness the positive elements, we have to learn about it, we have to have the data, and we have to manage it in a way to ensure that it continues to have a positive impact on the migrants, on their families, and of course on the countries that are involved in that migration.
And you say that migration in itself is not good or bad, but what are the biggest challenges that are facing migrants and refugees in Zimbabwe, including those that are related to labor, migration, diaspora engagement, and migrant integration?
So when we look at challenges in migration, there are many challenges that migrants face around the world. One, and probably the first and foremost, is access to documentation. And if a migrant is not able to migrate safely and are in a situation where they are forced to go for a number of different reasons, they end up working potentially in exploitative sectors, they end up working in informal sectors and not necessarily having access to services that they should benefit from, all the while bringing a significant amount of support and economic growth to the country where they are. They also, and the lack of safe routes mean that migrants at times are leaving in very precarious situations. They're traveling irregularly across borders. They face exploitation, they face a significant amount of risks, and we see that around the world. And in addition, they're forced to find other avenues as opposed to coming in for the reasons that they initially intended. And it's important to keep in mind that virtually every country in the world needs labor migrants. So the need for migrants is incredibly strong. There are also policy gaps, which means that there are not enough mechanisms and frameworks to support migrants around the world that allow them to be able to once again migrate safely and be able to be active and recognized members of any community. These situations are some that we face here as well. We face, in the case of Zimbabwe, because of the significant number of circular migration and Zimbabweans that are coming back, either because they might have been deported or they might have not been able to find opportunities elsewhere and they're returning back to their communities. So we also have challenges in terms of reintegration because they come with different ideas. They come with an incredible amount of wealth and experience that they've gained, but it can be challenging for communities to absorb them back because it's one more person who's looking for a job, one more person who needs to be fed, and they might have been gone for 10 years, 15 years, and are coming back and have different experiences. So for us, this is also something that's incredibly important, is building that cohesion and seeing migrants, be it external, international migrants that come here or returning migrants, as a part of society that can provide benefits and build the economic growth and development of the country.
And you've already touched a bit on what my next question was going to be. How does the IOM work with the Zimbabwean government to develop policies and programs that support migrants and refugees? And what are some of the notable successes that you've had as an organization working in Zimbabwe?
Okay, thank you for that question. IOM works on all spectrums of migration. So our work is centered around the migrant, the impact that the migrant has and how we can support the community, the government in which the migrant is from, the government and the country where the migrant is going to, or of course if it's internal migration from one province to another, from rural to urban, etc. So our work is all-encompassing in these elements. When it comes to Zimbabwe, we've been here since 1985. And Zimbabwe is a champion country of what's called the Global Compact for Migration, which has been accepted and signed by 164 countries around the world. And last year, Zimbabwe decided to be a champion country, which means that it commits and understands the importance of migration and is committed to ensuring that Zimbabwean migrants and migrants in the country are respected, are well supported and protected. Our work is with the government. We do a lot of work on policies. So we've supported the government in the national migration policy, the labor migration policy, the up-and-coming policy for diaspora, as well as strategies such as a national data migration strategy, which hopefully should be coming out very soon this year. For us, these are incredibly important because, as I mentioned in terms of some of the challenges, having policy that build a foundation and a structure for further implementation is incredibly important. And in fact, next week, Zimbabwe will be hosting the Migration Dialogue for Southern Africa, which will bring together all SADC countries in Victoria Falls at a technical level and a ministerial level in order to be able to address certain issues related to migration, climate change, data, facilitating movement, as well as labor migration. In fact, Zimbabwe is hosting the Migration Dialogue for Southern Africa, which brings together all SADC countries to discuss migration issues that impact in the region. And during this conference, there will be 4 themes: one on migration and climate, data and evidence, labor migration, as well as facilitating movements of people, including children on the move.
Ms. Cartier will continue this conversation when we come back in the second segment of today's episode of the Diplomat Couch. Join us. Welcome back to today's episode of the Diplomat Couch. If you're just joining us, today we have the pleasure of hosting the Chief of Mission for the IOM, who is Ms. Diana Cartier. And just before the break, you were mentioning that Zimbabwe hosts the conference on migration in Victoria Falls. What are the main focus areas and what is it that you'd like to share with our viewers about this conference?
So the conference will touch upon 4 different themes this time around. One is related to climate and mobility. The second is about data and building evidence in order to design policies and programs. The third is about labor migration within the region and developing agreements between countries. And then thirdly, it is about movements, facilitating movements of people, as well as protecting children on the move. And these types of conferences allow the countries to be able to come up with commitments together in terms of improving migration within the region. In Zimbabwe, besides supporting government on policy, we also have a lot of tangible work that we've done with government and, of course, at a local level as well. One, for instance, is IOM supported the government with the migrant resource centers, one in Harare and one in Bulawayo, which were launched in 2024, which are spaces that are available for Zimbabweans, for migrants that are in Zimbabwe, in order to receive information, and it's being supported and hosted by government. We've also created modules on ethical recruitment that are being used by private sector in order to ensure that there's no exploitation of workers in their value chain. We also have done pre-cultural orientation. For example, Rwanda hosts Zimbabwean teachers in Rwanda, and IOM has given them pre-cultural orientation in order to prepare them for their move to Rwanda. We work at a community level for the reintegration of Zimbabweans that come in, which I'd mentioned to you at times can be a challenge. So supporting both the migrants as well as the community with livelihood support, with trainings, with community adaptation plans, and how to adapt to this new reality when there's a significant number of migrants returning to those communities. These are some of the examples.
And can you describe some of IOM's humanitarian assistance programs for migrants and refugees in Zimbabwe and how these programs align with the organization's strategic plan?
So for your information and perhaps for your viewers as well, IOM is one of the top 4 UN agencies that does work around the world. So humanitarian work is central to our work. We have a global strategy, and our number 1 objective in that strategy is saving lives and protecting people on the move. And for us here in Zimbabwe, this is incredibly essential. We support migrants that are coming back, that are vulnerable migrants who might have faced significant amounts of trauma during the journey or in their previous location where they were living. We refer them to services, and we work with local services, such as health clinics, in order to be able to provide support. We do psychosocial counseling for migrants at the border areas around the country. In addition, we also provide, and we have the mandate to provide shelter and what is called non-food items during moments of emergencies and disasters. And through other partners, and so we do not work on this alone. We work with government, we work with other partners in order to be able to provide that support when and if needed. In addition, we work very closely with local government, with civil protection, with the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare, and Home Affairs across all of these humanitarian sectors in order to ensure that we're providing this support with government, alongside government, at times capacitating government, but also listening to what government is saying is needed. And of course, with the communities that might be directly impacted by a number of situations that would require humanitarian support.
And now that you've mentioned the partnerships that the IOM has with local organizations, the government, local communities, how do these partnerships enhance the effectiveness of the IOM programs, and how do they contribute to the wellness of migrants and refugees?
So first and foremost, no one can do any of this work alone. There's not a single government, not a single UN agency, NGO, or civil society association that can work on its own. So for us, partnership is incredibly key. IOM is unique in that we do direct implementation. But as a result, we also understand that we need to work with partners at all levels, whether it's at a national level with government or with trade unions, or local NGOs or international NGOs, but also at a community level with community associations, youth-led associations. And for us, this is incredibly important because they have, and particularly at a local level, they have information and knowledge about what are the needs on the ground. And we need to be able to respond to those needs and work alongside those that are directly impacted. So our partnerships are quite vast. We'll work with faith-based organizations. We also work with academia in order to look at research that might be needed, or how we can build on the research that's already existing, and ensuring that our programs are related to that evidence that we're seeing. And of course, the other part which perhaps we can expand on later is also about private sector, and ensuring that private sector see their role across the board. For us, when we're working with these diverse populations, we need to look at a vast number of partners in order to ensure that our work is efficient, that we're responding to needs, and all of us have our value added in the work that we're conducting.
And when we come back, we're going to discuss about the key challenges that the IOM faces in Zimbabwe in providing humanitarian assistance. So if you want to catch the rest of our conversation, join us in the third and final segment of the Diplomat Couch. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Diplomat Couch. I am your host, Osli Matsikinyeri, and today I sit down with the IOM Chief of Mission, Ms. Diana Cartier. Just before the break, we were talking about the humanitarian work that the IOM does in Zimbabwe. What are some of the key challenges that the IOM faces in providing assistance to migrants and refugees in Zimbabwe, and just generally as an organization?
So thank you for that question. I think first and foremost, a challenge that many stakeholders face is funding challenges. Clearly the needs are great and priorities need to be set. But ultimately for us, this is definitely a situation where the needs outpace the resources that we have. Another one is access. We work with communities that can be very remote. If they've been affected by disaster, the access to those communities can be a challenge. But as a result, we're not necessarily able to act as quickly as we should or as we would need to in the case of an emergency. There's also complex migration flows. When we talk about a migrant can be many things at once. They can be a potential victim of trafficking. They can be moving for economic reasons. They can be affected by climate change. And all of these elements make that it's very complex when we look at migration flows in a country like Zimbabwe. There's also stigma and discrimination that happens. And we continually need to talk about migration to show that it's not something to be afraid of and something that we should be looking at as positive, as opposed to attaching that stigma and discrimination to migrants.
And how does IOM's work in Zimbabwe contribute to the achievement towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly in relation to migration and sustainable development?
So in 2023, IOM put together a report globally about how we will not succeed in the SDGs without taking into account migration. As an example, globally, in 2015, the migrant population makes up about 3% of the global population, yet they contributed 9% of global GDP. That was just over $6 trillion worldwide in just that year. In a country like Zimbabwe, and I mentioned this in our first segment about the remittances, that in 2023 was 1.8 billion, 2024 was 2.2 billion. That amount of money is more than what is coming in from foreign direct investments in the country. Now, when it comes to SDGs, IOM's programming touches upon all SDGs, but let me give you a few examples. One is SDG 8, which is about decent work and economic growth. Our work with bilateral labor agreements, providing ethical recruitment for private sector, all touch upon SDG 8. SDG 10 is about reducing inequalities, and SDG target 10.7 is specifically about migration and ensuring that we're looking at safe, orderly, and regular migration around the world. And all of our work touches upon that. SDG 13 is about climate action, and we are supporting migrants and communities that are affected by climate adaptation, climate change, but also with governments in terms of building policies that are related, that include mobility in their policy actions. And finally, SDG 17 is about partnership, and it also talks about data and the importance of having evidence-driven programming and evidence-driven policy. And all of our work touches upon these issues as well.
And speaking of partnerships, what opportunities exist for the private sector engagement in migration governance and development in Zimbabwe, and how can they contribute to promoting safe and orderly migration?
Thank you for that question. Private sector is central across the board in terms of building economic opportunity and development in any country. And now more than ever, we see the interest, we see the curiosity and the desire to participate and be involved in development opportunities. When it comes to private sector, and in a case like Zimbabwe, besides, as they have done before, and proven examples of the support of private sector during disasters, such as during Cyclone Idai in 2019, there's also the opportunity to build jobs, to mentor, let's say, migrants or other members of a community that are high migrant returning areas, and build mentorship, provide training for these populations, as well as using their data, because money transfer companies have an incredible amount of data about where remittances are going and how they are being used in the country. These are some examples. IOM has recently signed an agreement with the African Leadership Academy based, well, it's actually across the entire continent, where we've been working with young youth, innovating, providing an opportunity for them to consider how to build migration-related programming and policies in different countries across Africa, including, of course, in Zimbabwe. We also have a program that's supported by the African Development Bank in 8 different countries on how to streamline diaspora engagement to build resilience. And this is about trying to ensure that diaspora can be part of investments and opportunities in the country. Finally, I just want to say that private sector is not peripheral. It's absolutely essential to any discussion we have about migration, about opportunities and development in the country. When a business partner acts responsibly, works with government, works with communities, works with IOM, they can help create jobs, they can ensure that there's ethical processes across all of their work and the partners with whom they work with. And for us, this is incredibly essential going forward.
Last but not least, Ms. Cartier, you've had a very distinguished career in sustainable development work. Can you briefly share with our viewers your professional experience and about yourself before we say goodbye?
Okay, thank you for that question. I've been working with IOM for almost 20 years and in this field for over 25 years. I started with IOM here in Zimbabwe actually in 2005, and then had the opportunity and the privilege to come back last year. But during the 20 years with IOM, I've worked in our headquarters. I most recently was the Chief of Mission in Costa Rica. I also worked in Sudan and in Norway, and then did what we call short-term assignments around the world, particularly in emergency situations. And the one that I came back to regularly was Chad. In addition to that, I've worked in Southern Africa and Mozambique and South Africa, working in development consulting firms, and then also in the United States, working with refugee populations, before joining IOM here in Zimbabwe.
Ms. Cartier, thank you so much for joining us on the Diplomat Couch.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
And to our viewers, we hope this episode on IOM migration and refugees in Zimbabwe has been as informative as we would want it to be. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.